Now, this is a comparison. Deinonychus, Utah raptor. There's a little blood channel right there. This is just the inner part of the claw. If you have a cat and you've ever had your cat shed her outer covering, the fingernail part of the claw, that would have extended out a lot further. There's kind of an interesting story about Utah raptor I have to tell you. When they made Jurassic Park, you know how they made the velociraptors really, really big? And all the paleontologists were just like, it's Hollywood. What is up with that? You know, why can't velociraptors just be small and cool and really gnarly? And so they were getting kind of upset at Hollywood. Well, then a fellow named Jim Kirkland, who's the Utah State paleontologist now, was cruising around in the desert outside of Moab, and he was digging around in the Cedar Mountain Formation and came up with this 12 to 14-inch slashing claw, and he named it Utah raptor. And unfortunately, Hollywood was vindicated because this happened right at the time the movie came out, and so Hollywood had it right. They actually presupposed Utah raptor before we knew about it. It's kind of an interesting story. Now this odd-looking drawing, we don't really have any good pictures that I could find of the actual thing. This is a jaw, lower the mandible, with a few teeth in it, of a little guy named Cocopelia. Cocopelia is, as far as we can tell, the earliest marsupial on the planet. Now there's one guy known from, one little fossil known from China, and of course the Chinese claim that that's the earliest marsupial, but we don't have good dating on the rocks it came from. So, as far as we know, marsupials arose from the Colorado Plateau and expanded out from there, which is kind of a neat thing to think about. This is the environment that the Cedar Mountain Formation might have been. These rivers, again, an environment a lot like the Morrison ferns, tree ferns, things like that. Now, by the late Cretaceous, the rivers have now started to flow into a shallow sea that stretched all the way across the central third of the U.S., from Hudson Bay all the way down into Mexico. And here's the Colorado Plateau, sat right at the edge of this ocean, this shallow ocean. And we find some amazing deposits from these regions, both where the ocean was and right on the shoreline of the coastal environment. The Mancos Shale and the Tropic Shale, both the same formations, the Tropic Shale further west and the Mancos Shale further east, this beautiful gray shale stuff was formed actually in this ocean, in the Cretaceous Seaway. And in this Cretaceous Seaway, we're finding some really tremendous things. This is sort of a reconstruction of what it might have looked like stretching out there across Denver. But this is one fossil that was known from the Mancos Shale over in Colorado. And this is a mass death assemblage of a crinoid, a floating crinoid. Here are all the heads, called Uinta crinos, with these arms, or these sort of stemless stems, I guess you call it. They weren't fixed to anything, floating around, and they all died together and ended up at the bottom of the seafloor. We are also, the Museum of Northern Arizona is finding a really interesting group of dinosaurs, marine reptiles, from a group called the plesiosaurs. These guys are mostly known from further east, and they're very rare on the Colorado Plateau. And Barry Albright and Dave Gillette and a lot of volunteers have been going up to Utah, southern Utah, every summer and digging out these guys. So again, very rare. Some really, really interesting finds in recent years in this Mancos Shale. Probably some of the most fascinating research that's going on today is up in Grand Staircase, Escalante. All of these later Cretaceous-aged sandstones and shales were all formed on the edges of this ocean. And in a very, very rich environment. Now we're starting to see things like palms and figs and magnolias, things like that. Really, really wild tropical, subtropical environment. I love this guy here. Clomping through the underbrush, that's a dinosaur leg. And we're finding some of the most varied dinosaur fauna in the world. The Wawik Formation, which stretches from about 78 to 84 million years ago, has probably the single most varied dinosaur fauna in the world, or certainly in North America. And so this region is giving us a lot of information. We find this weird critter called Pachycephalosaurus, the bone-headed dinosaur. It's a big, thick bone there. This guy probably did bash skulls with like the bighorn sheep do. Parasaurolophus is also known from the San Juan Basin in New Mexico. This long, wild crest. This is a hadrosaur, a duck-billed dinosaur. And this crest, they think, was used like a resonating chamber to make sounds for communication. Oh, and one last little guy up here. Avisaurus here, only known from two places. One specimen in Montana, one specimen in Grand Staircase, Escalante. A very early bird. It had sharp little teeth. It looked like a dinosaur, but it was built to fly. It had a wishbone and a keel for attachment of flight feathers and flight muscles. I mean, muscles, not feathers. Ornithomimus was a little ostrich-like dinosaur, a little tiny guy that ran around under the underbrush. And this is the impression of hadrosaur skin, duck-billed dinosaur skin, the impression of it on the mudstone. And there are only a few examples of this known for the world. And we're getting relatively quite a few out of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. And Pentaceratops, the earliest horned dinosaur, ceratopsian in the world, is a little guy named Zuniceratops found down near New Mexico. He ultimately gave rise to a lineage that almost culminated in this guy, Pentaceratops, very common from New Mexico. These wild horns and frills on the back of it. These guys ran around in herds. We call them the cows of the Cretaceous. They probably ran around in herds. And we find an amazingly varied invertebrate fauna. So, ammonites, these beautiful coiled ammonites. We find the teeth of, this is a ray tooth, escaped tooth. Snails, all kinds of critters like this. And probably, again, one of the most economically important, you see this dark layering here in the rock. All of that vegetation that I showed you in the picture before, as the stuff would die and settle into the swampy coastal areas, more vegetation would pile on top of it. Ultimately, it compressed down to form coal. So the coal of the Kuiperowitz Plateau, the coal of Black Mesa, this is all stuff that's forming from these late Cretaceous rocks on the edge of this giant sea. Now, you notice the dinosaurs are not around anymore. Well, let's put it this way. Non-avian dinosaurs are not around anymore. Almost every paleontologist you talk to today agrees that the birds evolved from dinosaurs. So next time you have your Thanksgiving turkey or your chicken dinner, you're eating a dinosaur. But we don't find these kind of dinosaurs anymore. We don't find the marine reptiles, the flying reptiles. We don't find none of these ammonites, many plants. All became extinct at the end of the Cretaceous. Now, whether or not this was an asteroid impact, which there is good evidence for, honestly, I have no problem with there being an asteroid impact. I don't necessarily think it caused this extinction. Perhaps it was just slow climatic change, which happens the end of the Cretaceous. This big Seaway was drying up. That's going to affect the climate. There were volcanic eruptions all over the India that could have affected the climate as well. Or it's possible that it was something we just have no idea what caused this extinction. But in any case, I love Gary Larson. I wish he was still out there doing this stuff. In any case, by the end of the Cretaceous, at 65 million years ago, the dinosaurs and about 25%, give or take, of the species on planet Earth became extinct. Now, there was a much bigger extinction prior to this at the end of the Permian 250 million years ago, but this is the one that captures everyone's attention. Dinosaurs, the non-avian dinosaurs became extinct, and the mammals began to have their day. And Jim, I have to apologize in advance. I'm giving short shrift to the Quaternion. I'm really sorry. But I'm sorry. Now, by the early Cenozoic, we start finding the Paleocene and Eocene. The ocean has completely drained away. The Rocky Mountains are now beginning to be uplifted. And in between these uplifted mountains, we're finding these big basins that were filling with water, draining out of these oceans. Oops, draining out of these oceans. Draining out of these mountains from the west and from the south. All of these rivers, and then draining also off here. And these basins are where we find the best Cenozoic record on the Colorado Plateau. These are the major areas of Cenozoic. Uinta Basin, Pisans Basin, the Claron Basin up here where Bryce and Cedar Breaks are, and again over the San Juan Basin